Hey everybody, hope you're doing all right. Sorry, I'm a minute or two behind. I was on a phone call with my family and had to jump off. Give me just a minute to share this link. Hi from Canada. Hope the weather's still treating you well up there. It's been chilly down here, but I will be up in Vancouver in the beginning of December. Looking forward to being back up there. Going to actually drive from SeaTac up through Bellingham because I lived there for a couple of years, and my daughter's going to be with me, and she was born in Bellingham, and she has not seen it since she was 1 year old. So yeah, another live stream. Can you believe it? Manitoba. I've not been to that part of Canada, unfortunately. I've only been to parts of BC, and then I've been to New Brunswick, oddly enough. Hi, Dr. Dan. Hi, NLC. I was recently shown a video about an evangelical archaeological expedition at Tel Shiloh, which they claim is the original Shiloh. Can you speculate on what the settlement actually is? I think the Shiloh could be the actual Shiloh, but we don't have a ton of there's not a ton of available data. So yeah, we've long wanted to discover some indications of an early tabernacle or temple or something like that, but yeah, we haven't found anything like that, and I don't know that this expedition is going to find anything particularly fascinating. Jean-Claude Van Damme's 1996 film The Quest is about an ancient and secret martial arts tournament called the Gong Gang. From your study of ancient manuscripts, is the Gong Gang ever mentioned? I've never seen that mentioned, although I do know, I think was it Kickboxer, where it's the kumite is where they're going, but kumite just means sparring. I don't know. I've never seen that in anything, and I don't know how ancient that is, but I wouldn't trust Jean-Claude Van Damme movies to be incredibly accurate from a historical point of view. Question for you: why is Paul's teaching so different than Jesus? Paul was had quite a different perspective on Greco-Roman period Judaism than Jesus. Paul was writing to different groups for different reasons. Paul was just a different dude. Greco-Roman period Judaism, 1st century CE Judaism, was not a monolith. There was a lot going on. So, you know, if you just pick two random people from 1st century CE Judaism, the odds that they were going to share all their beliefs in common is pretty low. So it's not a huge surprise that they had different teachings. And, you know, you see different teachings between the Synoptic Gospels and John, and even between the Synoptic Gospels, there are very different teachings. Matthew seems to be a Judaizer, whereas nobody else in the New Testament seems to. Are the concepts of hell a relative new invention in Christendom? So there are concepts of hell developed primarily in Greco-Roman period Judaism. The Enochic literature is kind of the seed bed for developments of concepts of hell. There are a few different ideas that are represented in the New Testament. Certainly the idea of eternal conscious torment becomes the standard view of hell within early Christianity, late antique Christianity, in the medieval period. There are some conceptual developments. A lot of literature, particularly Italian literature, influence the imagery that people associate with concepts of hell. So it's always changing a little bit, but I would say, yeah, it's post-biblical. Our concepts of hell are overwhelmingly post-biblical. Tristan Crum, thank you so much for the question. Is John 20:28 Thomas calling Jesus God, or more of an exclamation to both he and God? And was the two powers idea a majority of an apologetic thing? Two powers thing is a little more complex than than that. I think you have a concepts of divine mediation developing well before Christianity. The Enochic literature again is coming up with this stuff. Daniel is contributing to it as well, particularly the Greek translation of Daniel 7, where the Son of Man, the one like a Son of Man, does not come to the Ancient of Days. In the Greek translation, the one like a Son of Man comes as the Ancient of Days. And whether that was intentional or not, it seems to suggest some kind of identification of the two. I have argued that, and I will continue to argue, I'm going to be arguing at a conference in Italy next June, that the logic of divine images, the intuitive logic of divine images, is probably undergirding a lot of the different ideas that people had about how Jesus could both be identified with God and distinguished from God. Because one thing that you see in John is, if you've seen Jesus, you've seen God. And then somebody says, show me the Father. And he says, you've been with me all this time and you don't realize that if you've seen me, you've seen God. This is just like the logic of divine images. When you are in the presence of a divine image, that's not the deity, but at the same time, it is the deity. And to see a divine image is to see God. And you see this in places like Deuteronomy 16:16 and Exodus and elsewhere, where you go to the temple in order to see the face of God. And the idea is that you're looking at a divine image. And so Jesus manifests God's presence. And so to see Jesus is to see God, in the sense that Jesus manifests God's presence. And so what I have argued, and it's actually in one of the chapters in my book, I forget which chapter it is. I think it's chapter 9, maybe? No. Got to be later in the... There we go. The Bible says Jesus is God. That's one of the chapters. But the idea is, finally, Thomas gets it, that Jesus manifests God's presence. And so that is how Jesus is Emmanuel, God with us. Jesus is manifesting God's presence, just like a divine image would. So the author, here's a brief reading. The authors of John are not trying to subtly sneak a Trinitarian concept that wouldn't exist for centuries into the text. They're resolving the tension Jesus addressed in John 14:9 when he lamented, "Have I been with you all this time, Philip, and you still do not know me? Whoever has seen me has seen the Father." At least Thomas finally gets it. Jesus manifests the Father, not because he is the Father, even Trinitarians reject that, but because he is the authorized possessor of the divine name, and just like a divine image, he bears and transmits the Father's power, authority, and even his very presence. So that's what I argue is going on there. But thank you for a great question. And thank you, Division 1, for, I believe these are stickers. I don't know. I'm still learning. But thank you so much. I hope this doesn't sound disrespectful, but would the belief in transubstantiation be related to divine images? Yes, that would be what's going on there. The idea is a philosophical way to account for this intuitive perception that this material media somehow presences or manifests the presence of the deity. And I discuss that in my book, Adonai's Divine Images. In fact, I address the fact that, in fact, maybe if I can do subject index, do I talk about the communion? I don't think I talk about the communion, but there is a, let me just pull up a PDF, because I know I talk about a paper that talks about the communion and something similar to what I talk about. Give me just 1 second. Maybe I don't address it directly in my book. Maybe it's in my... Maybe it's in my full dissertation. Yeah, there's a scholar named Michael B. Dick who has published some wonderful stuff on called images, on divine images. Born in Heaven, Made on Earth: The Making of the Called Image in the Ancient Near East is one of the big ones. But he's done a paper on how communion is doing the same thing that divine images do. So yeah, that's not unreasonable and not disrespectful. Connor O'Hare, thank you for the question. Was Paul the false prophet warned in Matthew? I don't think so. I mean, it's certainly possible, but it doesn't sound incredibly plausible to me. But there are folks who have argued that. There are folks who have argued that Paul was the person who is condemned as Jezebel and as Balaam, I think, in the book of Revelation, connecting the idea of fornication with Paul's idea that it's okay to be married to a non-believer, and then the idea of that Paul said it doesn't matter, food sacrificed to idols doesn't mean anything. And so people have connected that to the accusation in the book of Revelation that that this bad person was suggesting, or was, being idolatrous. So there are folks who've argued that that's Paul as well. I don't know I don't think that's a consensus view, but thank you for a great question. Okay, Simone says, hi again, Dan. I'm wondering what you think about Job 19:25. I know my Redeemer lives, and or what you think the best work on this is. Is Goali here relative to the standard uses, or could it be related to Deuteronomy 19's concept of blood vengeance? That's a tough one. I tend to I mean, it certainly could be related to Deuteronomy 19. I was just reading something on this recently. What was I reading? I don't think it was a commentary. Matthew Suriano's 2010. Is this a paper? Yeah, Death, Disinheritance, and Job's Kinsman Redeemer from 2010 is a good discussion. I mean, Michael V. Fox's work on Job is always great. The Meanings of the Book of Job is one example there. There's another book, edited book by Leora Batsnitsky and Ilana Pardes called The Book of Job: Aesthetics, Ethics, Hermeneutics, that I imagine is going to touch on that. I don't know if I've come across the thing I was reading recently about that, but I was going to do a video on Job 19:26, the whole "in my flesh I shall see God" thing, and I was reading up on it, and I recently read some stuff on it. Unfortunately, I forget what it was because it wasn't directly relevant to Job 19:26. But the Suriano article, I think will be really good, and so will Fox's work. And then I don't think Greenstein's translation, I remember, it doesn't have much commentary in there. And what commentary is in there, I think, is, yeah, what he says is God. The note for Redeemer says God. Compare 16:19 and see below. The Redeemer in this context is one who protects the wronged. See Proverbs 23:10 through 11 for the sense. See also Isaiah 5:8. So, but there is a footnote. The respondent will testify on earth is how he renders the second half of the verse. And for the word testify, there's a note that says literally will rise to testify. See Deuteronomy 19:15. So it does make a connection there. What is your favorite Christmas song, and why can't any of the Beatles write a good one? Or maybe a better question, least favorite. My favorite is "Oh Holy Night," and the version by the lead singer of Sugarland, I think, is my favorite version. And I was tickled to discover that she follows me now on Instagram, which was quite a treat to see. Least favorite, anything that is being played on a radio station right now. As in November, anytime I turn on a radio station that's playing Christmas music, I am immediately angry at that song. Oh, RE, your 3D printed image / shrine, are you going to start selling those on a merch store? Would happily pay for one. I'm not going to sell those because I don't 3D print stuff. But I have made publicly available the files to be able to reproduce that for those who do 3D print. I am looking at making a shirt out of the Quintilla d'Ajrud drawing of Adonai and Asherah, but I still have to figure out if I'm going to use something like the drawing that was used on the shirt that was sent to me, or if I'm going to use the drawing that I did for my book, which is should be here. Oh, it's in this book too. And right there. Okay, so should I make a shirt with that whole image on it, or a shirt with just these two figures on it, which would mean kind of editing this quite a bit, erasing everything around it, filling in some gaps and things like that. So, and that drawing is in the chapter in my book on the question of whether or not the Bible says God has a wife. Speaking of the Tanakh cult statue, what's the best book that talks about it? Keel and Ullinger's book, Gods, Goddesses, and Images of God, is one of the best. I don't know how detailed the discussion there is. I talk about it a bit in my book as well. Now I'm going to forget his first name. There's a scholar named Doak. And I want to say Brian. Brian Doak has written some good stuff on it as well. He's the one I think that makes the best argument that it is fully representative of Asherah from beginning to end. There's a question I have apparently skipped. Are you looking forward to all the new Jordan Peterson inspired takes you will have to respond to now that his book on parts of the Bible is out? Oh, his book. What a like. It was so funny to watch him and Dawkins. Like, Dawkins talking about religion is awful in and of itself, but Dawkins is like, what? Do you think that Jesus was born of a virgin? And Peterson is just basically like, oh, what does a virgin mean? It's in all this and that and the other. And yeah, absolutely. And just the both of them are just spewing nonsense. I did not realize that a book was coming out, but holy crap. That means that I will have content for years to come. Conan the Librarian. Bruce Lee and Van Damme come from very different martial arts backgrounds, with Lee coming from Chinese martial arts and Van Damme coming from the Muay Thai kickboxing. Who would win in a fight? I think Bruce Lee would take little time dismantling Jean-Claude Van Damme in their primes. Yeah, but that would be a fun fight to see, and certainly with AI, I'm sure we'll see that fight before too long. Hi, Dan. Hello, Sir Dermahison. who or what is the Spirit of God or God's Spirit mentioned in the OT, like in Genesis or Isaiah 48:16? Hebrew Bible anthropology divides a person into a body and different partible and permeable loci or locations of agency. And so you've got the heart is a locus of agency, the bowels are a locus of agency, the eyes, the hands. There are a bunch of different loci of agency. And you also have a nephesh and a ruach and things like that that are the unseen loci of agency. And so everybody has a spirit which is separable from the body. And Richard Steiner wrote a wonderful book called Disembodied Souls that is open access. You can find a PDF freely accessible online. It's in the exact same series as my book, talking about how there are dream souls. And there's something in Ezekiel about women who pretend to trap dream souls and hold them for ransom and things like that. All kinds of cool stuff about anthropology of the soul, and the spirit. But God has a spirit just like any human, because God is entirely unseen. There's a lot more speculation, a lot more innovation on what God's spirit is like. But basically, it's God's active force and agency away from the physical self of God, which is something that, for the most part, remains unseen, except for a few exceptional circumstances with a few exceptional people. So it is an unseen agent that is like the wind. It is not immaterial. It is a type of material. It's just a more pure substance material that is unseen and that gets God's work done for them. And I talk about that in my book a little bit, not a ton. I don't talk about the Holy Spirit at great length, but I talk about the concept of spirits and souls and how they are active agents and things like that. But great question. Thank you. Hebrew Costa, thank you so much for the question. Great episode with Logan. Logan's a great dude. As a translator / linguist, I love how most biblical discussions fall on language issues and how the existence of translation itself poses a threat to any idea of univocality. Yeah, in order to preserve concepts of univocality, you really have to manipulate translation, because if you're engaging it adequately, it really nukes that concept. But yeah, Logan, I think I will see him next week. He will be at this weekend. Day after tomorrow, I'll fly to San Diego for the annual meeting of the Society of Biblical Literature, and I'm pretty sure Logan said he was going to be there this year. So we will get to hang out. Aramgard, thank you so much. How likely is it that Jeroboam was real? Probably fairly likely. The story probably not real, but it wouldn't surprise me one bit if there was a historical Jeroboam. His story is so dependent on the legendary Solomonic Empire. Could he be fictional and based on Jeroboam II? I mean, it's possible. He's coming right at the beginning of when the annals begin to refer to actual historical figures. So yeah, I would say it's plausible he's historical. If he is, it's nothing like the story that's told in the book. And incidentally, the story about Jeroboam is the story that I was responsible for writing for the Bible for Normal People's forthcoming children's storybook Bible that will be coming out next year. So that was the story that I had to tell in a way that was appropriate and accessible for children. So that was fun. Frevel discusses Jeroboam and Jeroboam II's relationship a bit in History of Ancient Israel, so the user might find that an interesting read. I know I have that somewhere. I'm just seeing a bunch of older German stuff that I have of Frevel's, but I'll have to check that book out. Jimmy Thompson, thank you so much for the question. Dan, is it possible that Matthew never read Paul, since Paul said to no longer follow the law, while Matthew quotes Jesus as saying to follow the law? It's certainly possible. I think it's more likely that Matthew just rejected Paul. They probably traveled in different circles. They probably disagreed on a lot of stuff. And so I think that's probably more likely. But anything's possible. There's an awful lot we don't know about what was going on under the surface of these texts. And if there are scholars out there who argue that, then I have not seen their arguments, but I'd be interested in seeing them. Conan the Librarian. Dan, full disclosure, I belong to an online Van Damme fan club. Would you be willing to sign our online petition to give Van Damme a Lifetime Achievement Award at the next Academy Awards? Yeah. I was tickled to see him in the Expendables sequel, but yeah, the acting was like everything went downhill since Time Cop. I'll be honest. I saw Tyson fight Spinks on TV, was the most believable thing I ever saw Jean-Claude Van Damme say. So yeah, since Time Cop, I don't think I've really, I mean, Kickboxer, Time Cop, those are the two best Van Damme movies, and I don't know that I would be able to sign on to a Lifetime Achievement Award from the Academy. But I would, if it happened, I would cheer. Chief Dixon, thank you so much for the comment. First Chronicles 12:22-23 story of Benaiah son of Jehoiada. Sounds familiar to David and Goliath and Daniel in the lion's den. There was certainly some recycling and revising of stories. David and Goliath is more likely itself drawing from Elhanan, who was the one who was said elsewhere in 2 Samuel to have killed Goliath, who's the shaft of whose spear was like a weaver's beam. And if you look at scholarly biographies of David and the development of the story of David by like Jacob Wright and oh gosh, I cannot remember his name. Joel Baden. They both agree. Yeah, this story was probably stolen from Elhanan and assigned to David. But yeah, there's definitely a lot of influence going on, and First Chronicles is pilfering Samuel for different stories. Wrong, you forgot Hard Target, John Woo. It's got Wilford Brimley on horseback. I cannot accept Hard Target as an answer. It is an entertaining movie, but how I measure my appreciation of a Jean-Claude Van Damme movie is, I imagine me being 20. My dog never barks inside the house. Like a senior in high school or out in college, and I'm home alone. I turn on the TV, and a Jean-Claude Van Damme movie is starting. I'm going to fall somewhere between shouting for joy, going to make popcorn, and having the rest of my night planned out, or immediately changing the channel. And Hard Target is, I'll watch it, but I'll probably flip in channels to see if there's anything better on. But yeah, Kickboxer or Time Cop, those are absolutely popcorn choices. The round table with Peterson and those scholars was so awful. Word, especially when Dennis Prager tried to bring in Jewish traditions and the other guys didn't agree. Like at one point, Prager brings up an ambiguity in the Hebrew, and all the other guys are like, "How does that matter?" Yeah, it's a joke. None of these folks are qualified to be pretending to speak with the authority that they pretend to speak with. Batman versus Wolverine, correct colors, who wins? You've got me in a bit of a trap, because my favorite Batman run was the Greg Capullo run, and I'm just now have a subscription to Greg Capullo's run on Wolverine, so I'm appreciating both of them very much. But I actually think I would say Batman, because I think as much as Wolverine's just rage and fury frequently makes the difference, I think Batman would be able to exploit that. But part of the reason Wolverine is so successful is because he dies and then he just regenerates. So Didymus, thank you for the question. Did an accuser exist in the courts of the ancient Near East? We have no idea. We don't really know much at all about the legal system anciently. From what we know in Mesopotamia, there probably was not like a prosecuting attorney. It was probably mainly just lawsuits brought by different parties. But we know that there's no court document or evidence of any kind that suggests anyone ever appealed to any of the law codes in a courtroom. And so the same is probably true regarding the various different and sometimes conflicting law codes that we find in the Hebrew Bible, but we don't have any data on the internal workings of early Israelite or Judahite jurisprudence. But I don't know that that was an actual like position that somebody held the job of the Satan in the People's Court. Super Sweaty Nerdman, thank you so much. Which version / translation of the Bible is best aligned with contemporary scholarship / history / data? I have long said this is probably the NRSV UE, and the edition that I would recommend currently of all the editions that are available right now would be the SBL Study Bible, which has the updated edition of the NRSV, includes the Apocrypha and Deuterocanonical stuff. That is going to be the best. There's going to be a 6th edition of the New Oxford Annotated Bible, probably coming out within the next year or two, that is going to incorporate the updated edition of the New Revised Standard Version. And I imagine that that version is going to give the SBL Study Bible a run for its money. But for now, I would say the NRSV UE. What are the scriptures Paul is referring to in the first few verses of 1 Corinthians 15, e.g. Christ died according to the scriptures? That would be the Jewish scriptures. Christ died in accordance with the prophecies about the Messiah. Of course, these would be, post-crucifixion renegotiations of the Jewish scriptures. So there's actually not, I don't think, a good case to make that there is a dying Messiah anywhere in the Hebrew Bible. That is something that was renegotiated after followers of Jesus saw him get crucified and went, oh no, we got to figure something out, and came up with the notion that the Messiah was supposed to die the whole time. But yes, I know that there are folks who argue that the Jewish folks were reading Isaiah 53 as a reference to a suffering Messiah before Jesus. I don't agree with that. I don't think that's is supported by the data. Tristan, thank you so much for another question. As J-Dub, I am happy to see our beliefs aren't too far from scholarship such as divine images, Jesus, hell, etc., not absent of negotiation of courses. Yeah, there are some places where the scholarship, I think, falls a little closer than it does to like traditional mainstream Christianity. There are other places where it falls a lot further. So, and the same is true with like Mormonism, and all traditions have their things that would probably align a lot closer to critical scholarship than others. But Salad, thank you so much for the Canadian dollars, much appreciated. Matthew, thank you so much for the question. Could you recap what's meant by the academic consensus? It's the majority of scholars at reputable institutions based on peer-reviewed work, right? Yeah, I would say it's the majority opinion, what most scholars think regarding specific research questions. And when it comes to being at reputable institutions, I don't know that factors into it. But obviously, most scholars are going to operate on a kind of sliding scale of reputability when it comes to whether this person is an apologist or a confessional scholar or a critical scholar. And so I'm actually working on a large-scale survey right now at SBL this weekend. I hope to talk with some people about them hosting this survey that will hopefully go out to thousands of biblical scholars around the world that will ask about their opinions on dozens of different research questions. So I hope to have some hard data within the next 6 months to a year on exactly what scholars think about all kinds of different questions. But that will raise the question again for debate about what exactly it means to be a consensus. But in my opinion, anything that's a majority view, I think can be called a consensus, even though there are weaker and stronger consensuses. And sometimes there are a lot of different opinions and none really bubble to the surface. Chief Dixon, Dan, thoughts on the NET Full Notes Edition Bible? The NET is a brand new translation from scratch. I think it is commendable for that. It makes some very interesting choices, a lot of which I would quibble with. The notes are usually incredibly helpful for folks who want to know what exactly the issue, what exactly the issue is. I don't always agree with the decisions that they make. But I think the notes are very helpful in case you want to understand, well, what's the debate? What are the things that scholars are saying? I think in that regard, it is very helpful. I have made some videos, however, about the fact that I've come across some of those notes that say, oh, this is most likely, and here are the scholars that argue that. And I know for a fact that the scholars that they cited actually argued directly in the opposite direction. That they have cited scholarship in defense of a position that scholarship literally and explicitly rejects. So very sloppy work on at least two of the notes that I've stumbled across that fall within my my wheelhouse, my specialization. And so I'm positive there have to be others that I have not come across. So while I think it is very helpful, I would never let it be the last word, and I would always question its decisions. But it is an interesting translation. Always helpful to have an additional voice in that regard. Jordan, thank you so much for the question. If Jesus only manifests God's presence, what do you make of John's theology of pre-existence and the fact that he created all that has been created? That's based on kind of an emanation theology that the word, the logos, you can go to Philo for a more thorough discussion of this logos, this second God, as Philo calls him, another God, as Justin Martyr calls him, is an emanation from God. And so in that sense is kind of God's active force out in the world. And within a Platonic philosophical framework, that's needed in order to bridge the gap between the world of the flesh and the world of deity, because never the twain shall meet. And so the word, the logos, bridges that gap, because you can't have full pure deity interacting materially in the world of the flesh. And so that's what the word is there for. And so Jesus is kind of the incarnation of the word. And when I say that this is the logic of divine images, and I talk about this, oh, you know what? That's not in the actual episode. In the recent Data Over Dogma episode with Logan Williams, in the after party, the little 25 to 30 minute after party that we record for patrons of the podcast, he and I talked about this at some length. In fact, I think we took pretty much the whole 30 minutes to do it. But the intuitive logic of divine images is what makes the idea that Jesus could manifest God's presence feel natural to people, just in general. But then they're going to rationalize it according to whatever intellectual frameworks they prefer. If they like Platonic philosophy, they're going to rationalize it in terms of Platonic philosophy. If they're like Mark, they're going to rationalize it as a kind of an adoptionist theology. And so they have a bunch of different ways to explain it. But intuitively, what makes it natural and easy to accept is the fact that everybody kind of understands how divine images work, even if they and so like a modern analog, if you go into a cemetery, you see it in movies, you see it on TV, maybe you've done it yourself, but if you go in a cemetery, you might see somebody talking to a headstone as if they were talking to the deceased loved one. The headstone is not the deceased loved one, but there is a sense intuitively in which it kind of feels natural to focus on the material medium as a channel for or a manifestation of that person's agency or something like that. And if you ask somebody to explain why they're doing that, you're going to come up with a bunch of different explanations, because there's one intuitive motivation. But then if you have to think, why am I doing this? You're going to explain it according to whatever frameworks tickle your fancy. So I think that's, and with John is thinking more in terms of kind of an emanationist take, but it's actually more like a conglomeration of a bunch of different philosophical movements. Okay, here's an annoying one that I couldn't find anything on. Etymology for the brief character Shama. Samson and Shamgar share extremely similar stories, and both are noted for their sun god theophoric elements. But nobody seems to comment on Shama's theophoric elements and how it might relate to a sun god like Shamash. Any reading there? It's complicated by Shama being renamed Eliezer in Chronicles, which for some suspicious reason has no sun god theophoric element. You said 2 Samuel 23. Let me... I have not heard anything about that discussion. It certainly could be close, but it's not exactly the same. We do have some resonance with the great Cairo hymn of praise to Amun-Re in this chapter. Son of McGee, the Ararite. Yeah, nothing jumps out to me. It's certainly possible, but I don't know that argument has been made before. But yeah, there are some resonances there. Salad, thank you for the question. When did the Moabites stop existing independently? It's a difficult one. I imagine there's not a sharp cutoff. There were probably some conquests that they just kind of were assimilated into things and just kind of faded off. But let me, because I can't imagine that they existed beyond the Neo-Babylonian period. But they might not even have made it to the Neo-Babylonian period. Let me see if we have a good answer to this. Yeah, I'm not finding too much on when they petered out. Moab had become a tributary of Assyria by the late 8th century BCE and was conquered by the Babylonians in 582, upon which the Moabites disappeared from history. Their territory was resettled by the Nabateans in the 4th and 3rd centuries BCE. So, yeah, somewhere between the early 6th century BCE and within a century or two of that. Hand of Omega, thank you for the question. What in the world is going on with one of the strangest Bible stories, 1 Kings 13, with the old prophet lying to the man of God so God kills him? That's a weird one. I think that's probably just condemning the false prophets who lie and try to exploit their status and their power. But I'd have to look up commentary on that to see if there's a specific issue that scholars think is in view. Okay, now what's the resonance with the first Cairo or the Great Cairo Hymn of Praise? Hang on just a second. So it looks like the title. Wait, what? The title. These are the last words of David, an identification of David. Tsumora at least says this long title is similar to that of some Egyptian poems, e.g., the Great Cairo Hymn of Praise to Amun-Re and the Great Hymn to the Aten. The formula, the oracle of ... the oracle of the man, appears also in Numbers and also Proverbs and Psalms. Only in these four contexts is this formula used in connection with human speakers. Gary Rensburg thinks this usage is of northern, i.e., Israelian origin. So it sounds like the form reminds some scholars of these hymns. Yeah, I think you've got to go to like Psalm 104 for a more direct relationship with Egyptian literature. Aramgard, thank you so much for the question. Is the tribe of Dan connected to Homer's Danans? Probably not. I think it because it's a word in Hebrew. But so if there's a connection, it would be Greeks borrowing, and I can't think that is. I can't imagine that's accurate. Short for the tribe of Danaus, and is derived from the name of the king of Libya in Greek mythology. Yeah, I can't imagine there's a connection there. I think that's probably coincidental, but I have not read any scholarship on that. Saunders Clark, thank you so much for the question. Thoughts on the Noahide laws, the 7 laws of Noah? I think this is a post-biblical way to say, see, we have laws for non-Jewish folks in here as well. I don't think the authors were intending to understand this as an independent extra Israelite law code or anything like that. But certainly an interesting renegotiation. Patrick McGuff or McGo, pardon me for not knowing how to pronounce that last name. Thank you so much. Didymus, thank you for another question. Do you like classic cartoons? Which are your favorites? There are some classic cartoons that I like. When my girls were little, when they were like infants, I would use old classic cartoons to soothe them and calm them down late at night when they weren't going to bed. So like Lambert the Sheepish Lion and some of those old things like that are things that I still enjoy. Or I would turn on, you can go to, I don't know if you can do it at YouTube. I think there are places where you can just look up old Looney Tunes cartoons and they'll just play you 2 hours of straight old Looney Tunes. So I like that kind of stuff, but I haven't had much time recently to watch much TV. Utsu Joe, thank you for the question. Hey Dan, what is the purpose of the lengthy genealogies included in Genesis and other books? Maybe I'm reading the text too much like a novel. Yeah, probably a little bit. The genealogies are intended to establish the lineage and say, we are sharing this, we are from this line connects to these people over here. And in Genesis, at least the primeval history, you've got creation account, you got story of Adam and Eve, you got genealogy, you got story of Noah and the flood, you got genealogy, you got story of the Tower of Babel. So there are links between these narratives as a way to show we've got an unbroken story all the way from the beginning down to how they thought of the world as existing at the time period that these things were probably originally composed, which was probably somewhere in the 8th or 7th century BCE, which is what we see with the Table of Nations in Genesis 10. So yes, it's serving purposes very different from what you might expect in a novel. So yeah, that would be a misuse of the genre to read it as a novel. Matt, thank you so much for the question. Gehenna being used literally versus metaphorically in the NT, was it a stand-in for eternal punishment or a literal reference to a disgraceful fate? So Gehenna is, you have the Valley of Hinnom that kind of runs southwest of Jerusalem around what's now called Mount Zion. And that was the place where the pre-exilic kings were supposed to have offered their children as sacrifices at the Tophet, which is by the city of David. And so it became a symbolic location for suffering. And in the Enochic literature, it becomes the place where there's going to be, the bodies are going to be heaped, and it becomes a location, a cursed valley where the angels, the disobedient angels, are going to be punished and like kept in waiting for their punishment. So it becomes a symbolic location of divine punishment, and then becomes a symbolic location of post-mortem divine punishment. This is what we see at the very end of Isaiah 66, where the people come out of the temple and look out over the valley. And that's where the fire doesn't die, and the worms have food forever. And the idea is not that the person experiences eternal consumption by worms and eternal burning by fire, but just that more bodies are being heaped on it continuously, so that the worms never run out of food and the fire never runs out of fuel. That's what originally the idea was. So yeah, there are folks who say, oh yeah, in the New Testament, when they talk about Gehenna, they're talking about the literal valley right down there, and that's not accurate. It's a symbolic, eschatological place of divine punishment, and the notion that it was a trash heap, that it was a landfill where they were perpetually burning fires, or where they buried criminals and things like that, that's all totally made up. There's no truth to that. Happy Sky, thank you so much for the question. Are there good and bad spirits here on earth? In the New Testament, they would say yes, and that is coming from a mixture of Greco-Roman period Jewish theological innovation and Greek ideas about spirits. And a good book on that would be Archie Wright's book, The Origin of Evil Spirits, which is about the reception of Genesis 6, or the story of the sons of God descending and having offspring with human women, which is the inspiration for the Enochic literature, First Enoch, Jubilees, and all that kind of stuff, which is the source for a lot of the ideas about the origin of evil and things like that in the New Testament. So our ideas about Satan, our ideas about hell, our ideas about heaven, all those things are rooted in the Enochic traditions. That's where they come from. Brent Hutchings asks, what's your take of when the Tower of Babel story started circulating? I think probably in the 7th century BCE, because it seems to me that it is making fun of the Tower of Etemenanki, which was built in the Neo-Assyrian period and then was kind of dismantled when the Babylonians took over, or at least somewhat destroyed, and then was left unfinished for like 80 years in the 7th century BCE. And so it was probably seen as kind of a symbol of the ineptitude, the incompetence of the Babylonians of Mesopotamia. And so, yeah, I think it's probably 7th century BCE. A good book on the origins of the stories that we find in the primeval history is David Carr's book. And now I've forgotten the title. Give me just 1 second. It's not composing. It's no, it's not that. Yeah, the formation of Genesis 1 through 11. Biblical and other precursors. And I may have gotten it. I may have my Assyrians and Neo-Assyrians and Neo-Babylonians mixed up. I don't remember what I said, but yeah, well, there's talk about that in David's book. And then we also talked with David Carr on the Data Over Dogma podcast. 6-7 months ago, where we talked about the stories from the primeval history. All right, got about 5 minutes, so I'm gonna have to cut it off here in a few minutes, but I'm gonna try and get to as many of these questions as I can. So apologize if you've been waiting. Is it possible? Thank you, Iowa Joe, for the question. Is it possible events from OT happened, but in lesser way and grew like a game of telephone? Yeah, absolutely, that's possible. There are folks who, scholars who think that there was some kind of exodus from Egypt of a small group of enslaved people who made their way to the northern hill country, and then that just became the fish story where it just got bigger and bigger and bigger, and all these details accreted to it, and it became this grand thing when it may originally have been a dozen or a few dozen enslaved people who one night got up in the middle of the night and ran off. So, Moses led 100 people from Egypt instead of 100,000, a couple million according to the story. Or Noah saved his family and flocked on earth, every earthly animal. I think you would have difficulty arguing for like the tradition of a flood. We can track that down to likely origins, and yeah, that would have been transmitting for 1,000 years, and so any connection with the original story would have been severed long ago. So I think it's certainly possible for some stories. I think we've got to cut our losses at some point, though. I don't think it's likely for, or even plausible for, all the stories, though. But yeah, certainly that's a possibility. Patrick, thank you for another question. A faith-building book post-deconstruction. Do I have it with me? Give me just 1 second. Carla Kamstra, Rev Carla from TikTok, Deconstructing, Leaving Church, Finding Faith. And you'll recognize that doofus right there who gave the quote on the front of the book, because that's me. This is a book that is about building faith post-deconstruction. And we interviewed Carla on the Data Over Dogma podcast 4 to 6 weeks ago. About the book. So she talks at some length about her experience deconstructing. So that's what I would recommend if you're looking for something like that. Thank you so much, Megatron's Royal Emissary. What's your response to critics of your work who claim that you're appealing to authority by predominantly representing the consensus of biblical scholarship? As I've said in many videos, I am producing content for consumption by a general public that is not able to assess and interrogate all of these arguments in all of their details and complexity. And so what I'm offering is a democratization of where the scholarship stands. And I've always said that the easiest way to get to where the scholarship stands is the consensus, because the consensus is the argument or the reading or the reconstruction or whatever that the majority of scholars agree makes the best sense of the available data. So that's all I'm offering. I'm not saying these things are all true and nothing else is true and this is the whole truth. I'm just saying, if you would like to know where the scholarship stands, these are the arguments that convince the majority of scholars based on the available data. I have no doubt that a lot of the scholarly consensuses are wrong. In fact, I argue against some of the scholarly consensuses, which is why in some of my videos I also say, this is my position, which is not a majority view. But yeah, the alternative, it's not an argument from, it's not a, what is the fallacy? I'm sorry, one of my children is yelling out there and it's distracting me. It's not an appeal to authority, because I'm not saying it's right. I'm saying if you want to know where the scholarship stands, this is where the scholarship stands. This is what most experts think is right. That's it. Could be wrong. It's not an appeal to popularity either, because I'm not saying this is what the majority of all people think. I'm saying this is what the experts think is most likely. So the folks who criticize me for representing the consensus obviously just don't like the consensus, but also can't change it because they can't come up with better arguments. So what I usually say to folks when they engage me directly is, hey, if you think your argument makes better sense, if you think it's more convincing, go change the consensus. It's what I am doing in the scholarship that I am publishing. It is what pretty much all scholars are doing in the scholarship that they're publishing. If you think it's wrong, go change it. If nobody changes their mind after you provide their argument, there might be a reason for that. So that's what I would say. But thank you for the question. It's been a couple of months, couple of months since I've shared that thought. Matthew Mullen, thank you for the question. Why isn't the Septuagint considered more original versus the Masoretic? Because we can account for an awful lot of the changes in the Septuagint based on misunderstandings, based on theological exegesis, based on lots of different things. And in some places, we do conclude that the Septuagint is more original than the Masoretic text. And the Dead Sea Scrolls have been a huge help in that, because they give us Hebrew manuscripts that are contemporary with, and in many cases even earlier than, the Septuagint. And so they show the textual fluidity that was going on. And so after the Dead Sea Scrolls were discovered 75 years ago, 77 years ago, and so we've had an awful long time to digest what they offer in terms of text critical data. And there are certainly places where the Septuagint preserves earlier readings, but the majority of the time it doesn't. But it's also not linear. It's a lot more complex than that, because it might preserve a different interpretation of what was an earlier reading, but it's not what we think was original. Okay, last couple of questions here. The Prep Project, thank you so much. Any way to reconcile Matthew 6:1 with costly signaling? Beware practicing your righteousness before others in order to be seen of them, for then you have no reward from your Father in heaven. Well, yeah, that's exactly what is being critiqued there. I would say that costly signaling is an inevitability of being a human living in human society. I mean, you're going to be doing costly signaling. We are intuitively compelled to do it. And our society falls apart in a lot of ways without it. So it's an inevitability, but I think being conscious of what's going on and being conscious of when costly signaling is the priority over and against when it's not, I think is important. So again, it's not quite linear. It's not just a binary of you're either doing it or you're not. You're kind of always doing it. But it's just a matter of being aware of it, and when you can see that it is overriding the data, or it's overriding more sincere motivations, then you might reconsider. Conan the Librarian, thank you for another question. Dan, do you think you could win a fight against Steven Seagal right now? No. Steven Seagal is really out of shape and overweight. I am aware. My money is on you kicking his butt. I took martial arts. My brothers and I took martial arts growing up, and I went to some competitions and I won some things, but it's been a long time since I have hit anyone. So yeah, I don't think that I would do very well. But yeah, if you want me to arm wrestle him, I have no doubt I could waste him, but elder abuse and all. So, Happy Sky, thank you so much for the question. Are some people chosen ones all along? I think there are different parts of the Bible that want to suggest that. For instance, Jeremiah saying, "Ha! God chose me as a prophet before I was even conceived, so suck it." So there are examples of that kind of rhetoric in the Bible, but if you're asking me a theological question, I don't deal in theology on my channel. I just deal in the data and the scholarship. So if I believe that there are chosen ones, I I would understand that to be a theological question and one that I can't answer. All right, thank you so much for. We got one more question. Archangel 246, thank you so much. Is it possible to be a believer that practiced Christianity despite learning truths a conservative Christian would find hard? God is a liar, etc. Oh, absolutely. There are lots of Christians who are aware of that kind of stuff and still maintain their faith. I think the book that I mentioned here by Carla Kamstra, Deconstructing, Leaving Church, Finding Faith, is a good discussion of engaging with a lot of those hard truths while maintaining faith. But yeah, a lot of conservative Christianity is built on rather brittle identity politics, which want things to be, and those identity politics need things to be binary because they need to be able to draw clear lines. And if you accept those binary, brittle foundations, then when those foundations crack, the whole thing comes tumbling to the ground. So there are an awful lot of people who consider themselves believers and Christians who do not accept such binary and such brittle foundations for their faith, and so are not as troubled by the notion that God is a liar. I mean, the authors of the biblical texts, the very people who wrote the Bible, accepted that. So obviously one can be a faithful member of a tradition based on the Bible and accept that God is represented as a liar if the very authors of the biblical text asserted that. So I hope that is somewhat helpful. Okay, thank you everybody for your time. I appreciate it very much. You make it possible for me to do what I do. And I can't thank you enough for that. So I hope you have a wonderful morning, afternoon, evening, wherever you happen to be. I hope you've got enough food on the table. I hope you have a warm, safe place to spend the night. And I hope that you have people around you who love you. And once again, as I mentioned yesterday, I started up a GoFundMe yesterday for a neighbor of mine who lost a leg to diabetes and is in need of some financial help. And we have already met our goal and even 150% of our goal. So that's incredible. I'm very much looking forward to transferring all of that money to my neighbor and seeing his face when that happens. So you've made my day and you've made his family's year, those of you who were a part of that. And I know the odds are slim that anybody here was a part of that, but thank you very much. It means an awful lot to me. I appreciate it. So have a wonderful night, everybody. I'll see you all around.